Billy. Thank you.
Thank you. Would you just remind me how many minutes I'm supposed to, 20 or 30?
Usually about 40 to 45 minutes.
Gotcha. Great. Thank you very much. Well, I know over there. Good evening, everyone. My name's Billy. I'm an alcoholic. And I am a recovered alcoholic. I just stopped saying that a long time ago because one of my defects is always wanting to be better than, always wanting to be the best. And so it's more important for me to be effective with newcomers than it is to make people think that I have some different brand of recovery. But I very much believe in what the big book talks about, which makes me very unpopular, unfortunately, I guess, but so be it. I am not that old, but I am an old school big book thumper. I came into AA at age 14. I got sober after being in and out for 9 years at age 23. And today I don't even like to talk about how old I am. But it means that, you know, I work as an executive in the insurance industry. And the reason I tell you that is has nothing to do with me being an AA member or my AA recovery. But in today's world of big book recovery, it seems that unless you work in a treatment center or attached to paid recovery, that somehow you're outdated, that I'm outdated, which is fine. I'd rather be outdated and alive than current and dead. I believe in the program of recovery that's outlined in the big book. I will tell you a little bit about myself, but honestly, I believe in what William James and Carl Jung believed. And that sometimes makes me unpopular. You know, if you go on a cruise or you go somewhere, we have this little catchy code word phrase, are you a friend to Bill and Bob's? You know, are you a friend to Bill's? And I always say, for me, I'm more interested, are you a friend to Fred and Jim's? You know, everybody has heard of Bill and Bob. But have you heard of Fred and Jim in the chapter more about alcoholism? Because if you haven't, you've been deprived Alcoholics Anonymous. Somebody has been afraid to introduce you to really what we are and who we are. And when you go back in history, which I'll do for a second, William James, the man who wrote Varieties of Religious Experience, which is basically a case study of people who had what he calls transformative religious experiences, which even I don't like the word religious, but in AA, transformative spiritual experiences. And what did William James say about them long before AA started? He said they involve intense emotion. He said that self-will doesn't work. And more importantly, and finally, he said that they give the individual the power to accomplish impossible things. The power to accomplish impossible things, which for me is not drinking and staying sober. That is impossible in the human world for me. And when you think about Carl Jung, who him and James had met and became friends, but what did Carl Jung say? And thank God, if you're familiar with our book, which this is a big book meeting, you're familiar that we have a story about a certain American businessman, you know, who came under the treatment of Dr. Jung. But thank God Jung had met James and came to believe in sudden spiritual upheavals. But what did Jung say about alcoholism? He said it's an illness, number one. He said it crushes its victims into feeling completely hopeless. And more importantly, he said there is no cure but a spiritual solution. The problem, I think, sometimes is that you can't schedule a spiritual experience. I can assist someone or show someone how to have one, but I can't schedule it. And it doesn't matter how many different color highlighters I have in my big book, right? I mean, it probably looks very impressive, right? It has all kinds of notes and different color highlighters, but that doesn't make you a member of AA or some great big book member of AA. It just means that I believe the book is not a treasure. I believe the book is the treasure map. It's the map to the treasure. And the treasure is content and sobriety. But in today's world of recovery, we have lots of other things. We have yoga and essential oils and horseback riding and God knows what else. And I'm not against those things. I'm not even against psychiatrists or social workers or therapists. I support them 100%. The only people I might be against are the crazy AA members who practice being a doctor, but they're not a doctor. And they seem to think that because they've been through the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous, they have the power to tell people to get off medicine, which I do not. I am not a licensed doctor. But, you know, when Carl Jung met William James, and he told him, and William James told him about the history of the world of sudden spiritual transformative experiences, he told Carl Jung that unfortunately they're as rare as getting struck by lightning. They don't happen a lot. And so I call the big book the recipe to get struck by lightning, because that's what the early members of AA realized they had between 1935 and 1937. They had the recipe for people like me to get and stay sober. And that recipe is so important, they put it in a book so that 87 years later, we still have that book. But it seems that to be like, you know, world famous in AA today, you have to be all for changing the book or discounting the book or complaining that the book is written with 1937 language, which I am a professional who lives in the modern world. But even when I read insurance policies from 1937, they have language that we don't use today. So I don't argue against the language that people in 1937 used. But, you know, my experience is that of a young boy who was an alcoholic. I suffer from what Dr. Silkworth describes. Dr. Silkworth describes two things that make you an alcoholic: a physical allergy and a mental obsession. As far as these people who talk about the ism, every employee I have has some type of ism. It seems that every human being is broken some way. But only about 10% of them have the physical allergy and the mental obsession. That's left for real alcoholics, as described in the big book. See, I was never even addicted to alcohol. I am one of those alcoholics who, I don't have a line in my story. And I'm not talking about a line of Coke. I'm talking about I crossed over a line. I've never seen that line. I only know one way of drinking. And that is, when I start, I can't stop, and I'm a complete disaster. And this guy named Bill, who wrote this book, there's an important chapter called Bill's Story. And I had nothing in common with this guy, Bill. He went to a prep school. That sounds way too fancy for me. He was a veteran of foreign wars and came home and went to law school. And then he bottomed out on Wall Street. That is not my story. But there's a section of his story that's very famous, where he says, I had arrived. See, when I finally went through the big book with someone who's been through the big book, I was able to identify instead of compare. I've had two important arrivals in my life. I'll not waste your time with my drinking story, but I'll tell you about them. See, when I was 12 years old, I knew that all the kids, they went to the woods, the older kids. I didn't know what they did in the woods, but I had a feeling it was fun. And by the way, when I say something is fun for me, that means the rest of the world tells you you're not supposed to do it. Anything where somebody tells me I'm not supposed to do it, I know I am going to love. That's been my story since I've been a young boy. I would be ashamed to tell you how old I was and how sober before I realized that everything that feels good isn't necessarily good, and everything that feels bad isn't necessarily bad. But the one thing that I know about myself is, if you tell me not to do it, I know I need to do it. So when my mother told me about the bad kids who hang out in the woods, that seemed like the place that I needed to go. And finally, an older kid invited me to the woods. And the woods changed my life. I had arrived. Particularly 4 things about the woods. Now, I warn you, you can judge me. You can say that I'm not well cultured or that I'm shallow or whatever words you want to use, but I just need to tell you the truth. The woods had a fire. The woods had loud music, particularly at the time, Led Zeppelin, Molly Hatchet, Black Sabbath, Pink Floyd. The woods had girls, and the woods had alcohol. And truthfully, if my life never got better than a fire in the woods, loud heavy metal music, girls, and alcohol, it would be just fine. I didn't need to look forward to anything else. Now, about 7 years later, at 19 years old, I can identify another time that I had arrived. I was in an Irish bar in New York. I love drinking in bars, by the way. And I've been doing it long before I was legally allowed to. But one night at 19 years old, at a place called the Tipperary Inn, I became part of a very select group of people. Again, the problem with my brain is the rest of the world is not looking to join this group of people. But I was. See, bars in New York close at 4 a.m. And at 3:30 or 3:45, you get last call and get your last drink or two. And then at 4 o'clock, the lights are on and you got to leave the bar. And see, at 19 years old, I became a part of the special group of people that get to stay in the bar when they close it. I got to drink for another hour while the bartenders cleaned up with the other special people. I had arrived for sure. Now, between the ages of 14 and 18, I'll just give you my educational history. I was either on detention or suspended from school. No in the middle. When it comes to the New York State criminal justice system, between the ages of 14 and 26, I was either on juvenile probation, adult probation, incarcerated on a violation of probation, and then spent my first couple of years sober, incarcerated. What I found about alcoholism is that I know what makes us alcoholics: the physical allergy and the mental obsession. But it seems that a lot of us have a lot of other things in common. They don't make us alcoholic, but they sure seem common among alcoholics. I don't like authority. I meet a lot of other alcoholics who don't like authority. The badder something the rest of the world thinks something is, the more I want to do it. I meet a lot of people like that. And I meet a lot of people who come to AA and want to do everything except AA. That was me. At 14 years old, the juvenile court judge sent me to AA. But you know, when I was a teenager, if I saw you get out of your car at a meeting with your own big book, I would never talk to you. I would know you're one of those AA lunatic, over-the-top fanatics who brings their own book to a meeting. And I got into a lot of trouble. Again, that doesn't make me an alcoholic, but I seem to get into a lot of trouble. Drinking, not drinking, I just don't like rules. When I finally came into AA the last time, a month before my 24th birthday, I had just had another car accident where someone was killed. That would be like my 5th related alcohol and driving arrest. I have so many arrests for disorderly conduct, drinking in public, fighting, assault. What's the other one I always love? Obstructing governmental administration. That's another popular one I used to get charged with. But, you know, I'm so grateful that AA didn't turn me out. AA didn't tell me I needed to leave. And inside that correctional facility, I want to tell you what happened. I was a much younger man than I am today. You see, at 14 years old, a judge told me he was going to send me to school at a juvenile correctional facility. And I was scared to go, not because I didn't think I was tough enough, but because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to drink. And by 14 years old, I needed to drink. See, when I got incarcerated, when I was sober, I found out that you can get as drunk as you want inside a prison. But I was sober a couple of months when I went in. And we had really good AA. And what do I mean by really good AA? We didn't have special prison AA with like half the steps and half the traditions. We didn't have some crazy AA that tells people with every other problem they can help them. Nope. We had AA with singleness of purpose for alcoholism. And we had good AA volunteers who came in from the outside so that we could have a meeting twice a week. And I know I'm dating myself, but when I got moved to a minimal correctional facility, I was allowed to have a Walkman. If you don't know what a Walkman is, it was a rectangular device that you could play cassettes in and listen to music. The number one songs at the time were like You Can't Touch This and Hammer Time. And our AA volunteers brought speaker tapes in. And one day I picked up a tape and it said Tom I, Aberdeen, North Carolina. I saw somebody, John, from the meetings from Aberdeen, and I will always think of Tom I. Tom I spoke all over AA. If you can ever listen to him, please do. He's been in a assisted living facility. He's over 65 years sober, but he's had a rough time the last couple of years. But I listened to Tom talk about doing a fourth step. And I listened to him say that it was the most important day's work he had ever done. That it wasn't perfect. It wasn't in a spiritual bound, leather bound journal. It was in a ratty notebook with uneven rows and columns. But that it was the first time he was ever able or even thought about looking at his own life. The first time he even conceded to himself for a little bit that some of his problems were of his own making. And that caused me to do a fourth step. And I have the same experience as Tom. The most important day's work I've ever done. It did not have perfect rows and columns. It was not in a spiritual bound, leather bound journal. It was in a ratty old notebook. I also learned about the importance of a home group. And I tell people all the time today, I don't want to be one of those arrogant big book thumpers who says that my only job is to take you through the steps. No, that's one of my jobs. One of my jobs is also to let you know what AA is and what AA isn't. One of my jobs is to introduce you to Alcoholics Anonymous. One of my jobs is that after we're done going through the steps, to take you through the traditions so that you don't pollute the rest of Alcoholics Anonymous with your insanity. As a result of meeting Tom I met a man named Don P. from Aurora, Colorado. You can listen to a lot of his tapes as well. I live by my favorite Don P. quote, which is as follows. The great thing about somebody who becomes rigid and dogmatic in Alcoholics Anonymous is it's a sure sign that they had a sudden spiritual experience. And the great thing about somebody who remains rigid and dogmatic, it's even greater evidence that they need to have another spiritual experience. And that's me. When I was released from that correctional facility, I did everything AA. I was still on supervision from the courts. I had a home group. I was on a young people's committee. I played sober softball. I had a sponsor. My sponsor made me save $3 a week, which might not sound like a lot, but at that time, some days I had to choose between food and cigarettes, and I always chose cigarettes. I can make it through the day with free coffee and cigarettes without food. And finding $5 on the ground would have been like finding $5 million today. But he made me save $3 for this crazy thing called the Joe and Charlie Big Book Workshop. And I went to that Big Book Workshop, and I laugh about it now because I'm so grateful to have met Joe and Charlie many times. But when I first went to my first Joe and Charlie Big Book Workshop, you know those people I talked about that get out of their car with their own big book? Like every one of those people from 100 miles would be in that hotel when Joe and Charlie were in town. Every single person I hated in AA. But that weekend, I learned what alcoholism was. That weekend, I learned that we don't have anything fancy to sell here. We have the 12 steps. That's all we have. That we're very slim and very tall. We know one thing, how to take someone through the steps. And I don't argue about things anymore listen, that weekend, I knew what it meant when I said my name is Billy and I'm an alcoholic. And I don't argue about things I used to be the person who would say, If you're just maintaining, you're dying, well, that's bullshit. Steps 10, 11, and 12, the book says, is our life, our sobriety is contingent. Contingent. A daily reprieve contingent on the maintenance of our spiritual growth. Not on our spiritual growth, but on the maintenance of it. And whether you have a flower or a plant or grass, if you don't feed it and water it, it will die. So I don't argue about that there's something wrong with maintaining your spiritual growth, especially because the book says that my reprieve is not contingent on my spiritual growth, but the maintenance of my spiritual growth. I was an atheist for 5 years in sobriety. And at one point I thought AA wouldn't work for me. But in my spirituality today, and the spirituality that I believe in, if you looked it up in the outside world, they would describe it as natural theology. That means that I didn't read something to make me believe in something. It means that I actually witnessed miracles with my own eyes in other people's lives that have led me to believe in God. But that took a long time. It took like 5 years. In the AA world today, I do not believe I'm a magician or a healer. I have many sponsees, all of them, that have something else wrong with them besides their alcoholism. But we don't treat that in AA. In AA, we take care of alcoholism. And when I hear people tell me that because they've had an experience with the 12 steps, that they can help anybody with any problem, it makes me worry a great deal. That's not the big book message of Joe and Charlie or Don P. It's just not. When I hear people say alcohol is only mentioned in the first step, that really drives me crazy. I have a big book in front of me. It's a fourth edition. The preface and the forwards, the doctor's opinion, all the way to the end of working with others, is that many pages. 103 plus 10 pages for the preface and forwards and doctor's opinion. If you want to go to the part that talks about alcohol, so I don't have to argue, I'll just say to the end of more about alcoholism. About 50 pages out of that 103. 50 pages. I want to read what Dr. Silkworth wrote, or what is in AA Comes of Age. Because sometimes we run into newcomers and we talk about everything except what we should talk about. The same conversation that Bill had with Dr. Bob. And this is what Dr. Silkworth told Bill before he met Dr. Bob. Look, Bill, you're having nothing but failure because you're preaching at these alcoholics. Silkworth pointed out the frightening aspect, especially to alcoholics, of the Oxford group absolutes, the apparent weirdness and disconnecting nature of the hot flash conversation experience that Bill insisted on describing to each potential recruit. He told Bill, don't be talking to newcomers about the window blowing open in the middle of the night and God coming in on a cloud in the middle of the night and you feel like you're floating on a mountain. That's not how we talk to the new person in Alcoholics Anonymous. We give them the medical estimate of alcoholism. What makes you an alcoholic? The Me Too moment that Dr. Bob had with Bill. He was only supposed to give that meeting 15 minutes, yet he gave it like a couple of hours because the man sitting across from him described alcoholism in a way no one else ever had. He had the same thing wrong with him. When he started drinking, he can't stop. When he's completely physical sober, the mental obsession, his uncomfortability in his own skin is so great that he lights the fuse and has the first drink all over again. And it makes me worry because I don't believe what the outside world believes. I stick to AA. And those in the paid recovery world want every disease to be the same. They want gambling to be the same as alcoholism, as the same as drug addiction, as the same as bulimia, as the same as, and I always use food as an example because I don't think people realize when they say such foolish things that the solution for one food illness is a death sentence to another food illness. So these people who believe that because they've been through the 12 steps, they can help everybody. I can help alcoholics. I don't care what other problem you have. You could have a million other problems. But if one of them is in alcoholism, if we can't start on identification, we can never get the first 3 steps. And like the book says, next, do our inventory. We can't ever get to 6 or 7. I can't ever get to making a list and making amends. And then the confusion into AA today, we actually have some people who are selling inventory sheets. Selling big book inventory sheets. And if you look at them, they don't describe the 10th step, they describe the 11th. They have the questions of the 11th step in the big book on these photocopied sheets that say 10th step inventory. I'm glad that my sponsors taught me the difference between the 10th and the 11th step. And I'm glad that my ego is out of the way. I'm glad that I don't meet a heroin addict who tells me he's not an alcoholic and tell them that I could help them anyway. I don't kick them out of AA. In fact, I have tons of friends in Heroin Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous, and I've learned that AA as an organization has just as much of an ego problem as I do. We think that because we were the first, that we're the best and we can do everything. But what I would like to tell you, and this is my experience, there's 32 of us in this meeting right now. There are 32 other members of other fellowships who are meeting right now as well, who are just as passionate about recovery. And some of them even use the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. But the AA has taught me the immense power I've been given to carry the message to another alcoholic. But it's also taught me my limitations, that I stick to what I know. And I think I've been given the greatest life as a result. And if I can stay out of the way, if I can keep my ego out of the way, and if I can not be afraid to just speak up for AA. I was at a meeting, I'll close with this, a couple of weeks ago. And the speaker, not that I care where he works, but he said he worked in paid recovery. And he said that he has his sponsees make a collage of pictures from magazines for their first step. And I just said to myself, like, how sad that is, that it has no place in AA. And the reason I tell you that is, I had a young kid about 6 months ago ask me if I could help him with his 4th step. And I had him meet me right down the street from where I live on the ocean in Florida. And we met at an outdoor picnic table. And I asked him to show me in the big book where he left off. And he said, oh, we didn't use the big book. And I just said, well, I don't judge anyone, but I don't understand that. The only way I know to help someone in AA is to take them through the big book as the steps are outlined in the big book, and to start at the very first blank page and go all the way through. But just because that's not popular in AA today doesn't mean that I'm going to change my mind, because in my experience, that's what saves lives. Thanks very much for having me today.